Power without limits destabilizes society. Not immediately, not loudly, but gradually, through quiet concentration. When one party can lend without restraint and another must borrow without relief, imbalance hardens into structure. And once structure forms around imbalance, it becomes invisible. The Torah addresses this dynamic with unusual precision. Hidden within the legal passages of Deuteronomy is an economic commandment that rarely receives attention outside scholarly study. It does not promise prosperity. It does not condemn wealth. It regulates power. It constructs limits around lending, debt, and financial leverage. It builds release into obligation. This is an investigation into that moral architecture. Part 1. The setting of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is not narrative in the conventional sense. It is Moses' final address to a generation preparing to enter settled life in the land of Israel. The wilderness generation is ending. Agriculture, property, trade, and local courts are about to become daily realities. In this transition, Deuteronomy does something remarkable. It anticipates not only spiritual challenges, but economic ones. Among its instructions is a passage in chapter 15. At the end of every 7 years you shall make a release, and this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor or his brother, because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. This is the Shemitah, the sabbatical release of debts. It is not symbolic, it is legal, and it is radical. Part 2. The structure of release. The instruction is precise. Every 7 years, outstanding debts between Israelites are to be released. Creditors must forego collection. Borrowers are freed from ongoing obligation. Notice what the commandment does not say. It does not forbid lending. It does not abolish private property. It does not eliminate financial hierarchy. It limits duration. Power is permitted, but only within time. The Hebrew word for release, shmitah, carries the sense of letting drop, loosening the grip. It is not destruction. It is release of hold. This subtle distinction matters. Debt is allowed to exist. It is not allowed to exist indefinitely. Part 3. The context of ancient lending. In the ancient Near East, debt was not merely financial, it was existential. Crop failure could force families into borrowing. Borrowers unable to repay risked losing land, livestock, and even personal freedom. Debt slavery was common in surrounding cultures. A creditor, over time, could accumulate land and labor through compounding obligation. Deuteronomy interrupts that trajectory. By instituting a 7-year release cycle, the Torah prevents the permanent transformation of borrower into subordinate. This is not sentimental charity, it is systemic restraint. Without limits, power becomes leverage. Leverage becomes dominance. Dominance becomes class stratification. The Torah recognizes this progression. Part 4. The psychological dimension of lending. Lending creates asymmetry. The creditor waits, the debtor owes. Over time, the psychological weight shifts identity. The borrower becomes defined by obligation. The lender becomes defined by entitlement. Unchecked, this dynamic corrodes community cohesion. The release cycle interrupts identity formation around debt. A borrower remains a temporary debtor, not a permanent inferior. The creditor remains a steward of capital, not an accumulating sovereign. Power here is intentionally destabilized before it solidifies. Part 5. The warning against hesitation. Deuteronomy continues with a remarkable addition.
Beware lest there be a base thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release, is near, and your eye be evil toward your poor brother, and you give him nothing. The Torah anticipates rational calculation. If a creditor knows release approaches, he may refuse to lend. The text addresses this directly. It warns against withholding due to upcoming cancellation. This is not naivete, it is ethical pressure. The system assumes risk. Lending is not purely commercial, it carries communal obligation. Yet this obligation is bounded by time. Part 6. Release is not chaos. It is tempting to interpret the sabbatical release as destabilizing to credit markets, but historical Jewish communities developed mechanisms to balance compassion with continuity. The most notable is the prosbul, instituted by Hillel the Elder centuries later. It allowed debts to be transferred to the court, thereby circumventing automatic cancellation while preserving the spirit of the law. Why was this necessary? Because without adaptation, lending could diminish significantly as the release year approached. The prosbul illustrates something subtle. The Torah's principle is moral architecture. Its application evolves with economic complexity. The goal remains constant: prevent concentration of permanent financial power. Part 7. Interest and restraint. Deuteronomy 23 adds another dimension. You shall not charge interest to your brother, interest on money, food, or anything lent at interest. Interest between Israelites is prohibited. Again, this is not blanket prohibition. Interest with foreigners is permitted. The distinction reflects communal boundary logic. Within the covenantal community, lending is assistance, not exploitation. Outside it, commercial norms apply. The economic implication is profound. Interest amplifies leverage over time. It accelerates power concentration. By restricting interest internally, the Torah reduces compounding inequality within its society. This is not anti-market, it is anti-dominance. Part 8. The release of Hebrew slaves. In Deuteronomy 15, the release principle extends beyond debt to indentured servants. A Hebrew servant is to be freed in the 7th year, and not empty-handed. The master must provide livestock, grain, and wine. Release includes reintegration. Debt cannot convert into permanent labor extraction. The Torah repeatedly resists permanence in subordination. Power must reset. Part 9. Economic cycles as moral checkpoints. Beyond the 7-year release stands the Jubilee, the 50th year, when land returns to original families. Together, sabbatical and Jubilee form layered cycles. 7-year resets for debt, 50-year resets for land. Time itself becomes regulatory mechanism. In modern systems, regulation is often external, imposed by centralized authority. In the Torah, time regulates power organically. No creditor can extend dominance beyond a defined horizon. No land accumulation becomes irreversible. Cycles function as moral circuit breakers. Part 10. Misunderstanding the Commandment. Modern readers sometimes reduce the sabbatical release to spiritual symbolism. Others dismiss it as impractical idealism. Both miss the structural insight. The commandment recognizes that markets alone do not self-correct concentration of leverage. Without periodic reset, asymmetry compounds. At the same time, the Torah does not abolish lending or property. It moderates duration and method. It assumes human ambition. It restrains its excess. Part 11. The discipline of the creditor. The creditor under this system must calculate differently. Return on investment is limited by time. Interest cannot amplify internally. Release approaches predictably. This shifts mindset. Lending becomes partnership in stability rather than strategy for dominance. Risk assessment includes moral dimension. Capital exists within covenantal constraint. Part 12. Historical Echoes. Throughout Jewish history, communal structures often reflected these principles. Free loan societies, gemach, emerged in medieval communities offering interest-free loans for business and emergencies. Repayment expectations existed, but without compounding pressure. Documentation remained meticulous. Obligation was real, but dignity was preserved. The moral architecture of Deuteronomy extended into practice across